all, I'm Robin. Welcome back to my channel. So today I am wrapping up my fall TBR at the start of the season. I made a TBR of 10 books that I wanted to read throughout fall. Now we are going to look back on that TBR and go over everything that I ended up reading, what I rated it, give a little review for all 10 of the books, and then we're going to go into my favorite books of fall. I will link the fall TBR up in the cards. If you haven't seen that yet, you can go back and watch that fall TBR. But of the 10 books that I had on that TBR, I have, as of right now, finished 8 of them, and the other 2 I have actually started and I am in the middle of reading. So I'm going to start with the 2 that I'm still currently reading, and then we're going to go from my least favorite book to my favorite book because there is a very, very big spectrum here. So the 2 books that I am currently reading are A History of Wild Places by Shea Ernshaw. I only have the dust jacket here because the physical book is in a different room, but I am on page like 50 or something like that. I'm not very far into it. I am taking my time with this book. It is just as beautifully written as I had expected, and I'm already really, really in love with everything about this, in all honesty. I have been reading it physically along with listening to the audiobook. I wanted to like see what the audiobook was like, but I also love reading Shea Ernshaw's writing physically. So I'm kind of going back and forth between the two of those. And I'm hoping to finish this one up this week, but I'm really enjoying it even though I'm not very far in. And then the other book that I am currently reading that I just started is As Good as Dead by Hallie Jackson. I started this one last night, so again, I'm not very far in at all. And this is a bit of a chunky book. I absolutely adore the series. The start of this book is very dark. You are following the heroine who is now dealing with a lot of trauma from the previous 2 books. And I will say that the opening sequence of this was really difficult to read because she is having some like PTSD at the beginning. I'm really excited to get into the actual mystery aspect of this. And this is one that I plan to finish up this week as well. I'm listening to it on audio, and the audiobook of this series is fantastic. So I definitely think that this is one I'm going to finish in the next day or two. So getting right into the wrap up, the first book on this is actually a DNF, and that is Kingdom of the Curse by Kerri Maniscalco. I did reread Kingdom of the Wicked right before diving into this one, and I did lower my rating. I think originally I gave it a 4-star, and I ended up lowering it down to a 3, and then I got about 25%, I think it was technically 26% into this book, and I couldn't do it anymore. I don't know what it is with Kerri Maniscalco books, but I love her concepts, and in execution, they just fall short, and that was exactly the case for this series. Is I love the concept of this entire series, this world, these characters, but I do not like the execution of it. It is so slow and so weirdly paced. The heroine in here, just like in the Stalking Jack the Ripper series, the heroine is so unlikable. And I don't think it's meant to be intentional. She's just an terrible heroine. Could not read one more sentence from her perspective. Book 1, like I said, I ended up lowering to a 3-star. I liked the concept. I listened to it on audio the second time through. I think I read it physically the first time, and I listened to this on audio as well. And the audiobook is fine. I like the narrator perfectly fine. It is so aggravating being in this heroine's head because she just makes terrible, terrible choices. And it happens over and over and over again. And by the time that I got to this, I was just so frustrated with her because none of her choices make any sense. Like she would do something and I'd be like, But why? Why would of all the things you could have come up with to get yourself out of this situation, you like listed them all out and chose the dumbest one. Another thing that bothered me with this book is so you finish off book 1 and you're like, okay, we're going into the underworld. And I got a quarter of the way through this and we made it through like 3 days. And one of them was the heroine being unconscious. And so I'm like, we made it through a day of them traveling, 1 day of like caretaking where she's like in and out of consciousness, and then like 1 day of her like being in the palace. Nothing happened. Like there was no plot. It was just endless exposition of the heroine describing in excruciating detail the cold and her wardrobe and the colors of the rooms that she was in. And it's like, I get it, like, he's an ice king, like, I got that from the cover. And then on top of that, there was, like, this big push that this book is new adult and not YA, and y'all, this book is YA, like, do not listen to them. This is not new adult. You describing in really vague detail attraction does not make this new adult. Like, there's nothing new adult about this. She has, like, a couple of scenes where she's like, "Oh, I imagined his length against me." That that's not new adult, like, the Sarah J. Maas has been writing that in YA for years. So I don't know, like, there was this big push about this being YA or not being YA, but I don't know, guys, this is definitely YA, and I did look at reviews, and this is still Fade to Black, so I'm giving up on this. I think I'm giving up on Carrie Maniscalco as an author in general because I just find that every single time I read one of her books, my complaint is always, "I loved this premise, but in execution, I'm really disappointed." And like I think this is the last one. I think we're parting ways. After that was another huge disappointment, and I'm going to be talking about this again in an upcoming video, so I'm going to keep this one pretty short. But I gave When Night Breaks by Janelle Angelis 2.5 stars. This is my biggest disappointment of the year. Spoiler alert. This is the conclusion to the Kingdom of Cards duet. This conclusion did not do it for me. I didn't like where the focus was. I didn't like how the characters wrapped up. I didn't care for this. But I still want to read more from Janelle Angelis because the first book in this series, and I did reread the first book and I loved it just as much the first time, but this second one, it just felt like a whole new author, a whole new world, all new characters. It just did not continue from the beauty of the writing of book 1. It was very different in this one, so I'm hoping that whatever Janelle Angelis picks up next kind of goes back to what I loved from Where Dreams Descend, and maybe this was a fluke. Yeah, I don't wanna go too much into more detail because I don't wanna be repeating myself a whole bunch of times. If you want detail on what I didn't like, stay tuned for my most disappointing reads of the year video. After that was another 2.5 star read, but I did like this one a little bit more. I think I rounded up to a 3 star on Goodreads, and that was The Death of Jane Lawrence by Caitlin Starling. This I read not only because it was a anticipated release, but I also read this for the Literally Dead book club for I think November, and this was kind of a tale of halves. I loved the first half of this. It was really gothic and eerie, and then it takes a turn around the halfway point, and it turns magical and fantastical, and I didn't love that part. So, yeah, there were parts of this that I really, really liked and thought this was going to be, like, a 5 star, and then the second half was, like, a 1 star. Like, I did not jive with the second half of this book. But yeah, I think this is going to be on my most disappointing list as well, so I will go into more detail on that video, but this one was a 2.5 star. It was a bit of a bust. Getting into some more positive reviews, the next one on this list is A Spindle Splintered by Alex E. Harrow. This I gave 3 stars. This was fine. It is a really short little novella. I listened to this on audio, but I do recommend the physical book because there are illustrations throughout, which is really cool. I did not know that when I started this. I didn't realize that this was illustrated. So I kind of wish I had read this physically, but this is a twist on Sleeping Beauty, and you are following a heroine who is chronically ill, and she doesn't know how much longer she has left to live, but she ends up getting sucked into this like fantasy world where she can like see a bunch of other sleeping beauties. She helps rescue a sleeping beauty. And this was fun. It was cute. It was really, really short. It was a quick listen. I just don't feel very strongly about this book in any way. And that was kind of how I felt when I finished it. I was like, okay, that was cool. And like I don't have many memories of it anymore. Like as I'm like describing the premise, I'm like, I don't really remember what happened in here. I do not plan to continue on with this series. I believe the next one is an Evil Queen retelling, which sounds cool, but like I'm fine just like leaving it at this one and parting ways with the series. So if you are really into retellings, I do recommend checking this one out because it is like a really cool twist. It's very like feminist and giving the power to the princesses instead of the princes. I do really like that aspect of like letting the princesses save themselves. And this had good chronic illness rep in here and everything like that. It just didn't do much for me. So this one I gave 3 stars. It was good, it was fun, but not something I'm ever really gonna think about again. After that, I read Within These Wicked Walls by Lauren Blackwell, and I gave this one 3.5 stars. This was a Jane Eyre retelling, but with demons, and this was another case of, like, me loving certain aspects and, like, not loving others. This had amazing gothic vibes. I loved the demon, like, exorcist portion of this, but I thought this was gonna be more horror, and it's definitely more romance heavy than I was anticipating, and I just didn't love the romance in here. I really wanted to love the romance, but it didn't quite work for me. I still can't place my finger on exactly what didn't work for me. There's a lot of back and forth between these 2 characters of, like, her being like, "Oh, I really like this guy." They would kiss or, like, have a lot of chemistry, and then she would just, like, flip a switch and, like, pull back, and that happened, like, 3 or 4 times. I was like, "Okay, like, I'm over that," and then all of a sudden, they were just like, "But we're in love now." And so I didn't really like the progression of the romance. It felt very much like back and forth, and then, like, 0 to 100. I prefer to, like, I don't know, slowly watch the romance develop, and that just really wasn't the case in here. And because of that, I wanted the focus to be more on the demon side of it than the romance side, but I did really like the ending of this a whole lot. Again, there were aspects of this that I really loved and aspects that, like, were a bit of a miss, but in the end, I ended up really enjoying this story. Like I said, I gave it a 3.5 star. I do recommend it. It was a good spooky time read. It was well written, and I definitely plan to check out more from Lauren Blackwood in the future. Getting into the books that I really liked, finally. First up was Payback's a Witch by Lana Harper. I gave this one 3.5 stars as well, but I do think I rounded it up to 4. This was pitched as a sapphic witchy romance. And I don't think that I would classify this as a romance. I think I would classify this as a contemporary story. This is so much more about the heroine's personal journey, both like accepting who she is as well as her powers and coming to terms with like her family's status in society and what she wants out of life. And there is a romance in here, but the romance is not the focus. And I think that is actually what lowered my rating for this, as my expectations were just very different than what this book delivered. And that has been an irritant for me this year is I've been picking up a lot of books that like are being pitched and marketed as romances, and then when you read them you're like this was not a romance. Just because there is a relationship in the story doesn't mean that this book is necessarily a romance. It is setting up readers up for failure and like books up for failure, and it's bothering me a lot, and I really hope that trend disappears. This book is really well written. Like I said, it does have a really, really good romance in here. I did love both of the heroines and their chemistry and everything like that. But the focus of this is very much so on the small town and this family and the heroine's personal journey. And those aspects were absolutely wonderful. I just wish that I had known that that's what the focus was going into this because I was very confused for part of this novel as to why why this wasn't very romantic in nature. I did love the family aspect. This has a great small town. This has, like I said, really, really beautiful writing. The descriptions in here are stunning. And overall, I had a really good time. I do plan to continue on with the series. Now that I know what I'm getting into, I think my expectations are in the right place moving forward, and I think I'm gonna love the rest of the series. I am really excited for the sequel because I am really intrigued by the couple in that book. So I am definitely continuing out the series. I did really enjoy this. Just know going in that this is a contemporary, not a romance. And then after that, I read The Ex Hex by Erin Sterling, and I gave this one 4 stars. This book was ridiculously hyped around October, and I know a lot of people ended up being disappointed by it, but I think I read this like before the hype got too big. So my expectations, I think, were just in the right spot. But I thought this was so much fun. It was really, really cute and cheesy, and it was everything I wanted for a witchy Halloween romance. This has one of my favorite settings of the entire year. I want to move to the small town and live there forever. I loved the romance and the enemies to lovers, and I don't know, it just everything about this was just cute and fun and sweet, and I just really, really enjoyed it. Like I said, this was nothing like mind-blowing, but it was such a good time. The entertainment factor was so high, and I really liked this, so I gave this one 4 stars. And then my favorite book and the one 5-star book that I had off of this TBR was A Marvelous Light by Freya Marske. This book was everything I wanted and so much more. I think I talked about this in my TBR, but this is one of those books that like I just had a feeling was going to be 5 stars. And because of that, I kept putting off picking this up because I was like, but what if it doesn't live up to all of my self-induced hype? But I had nothing to worry about. This book was fantastic. I loved the like banter and the style that this book is really funny and like it was really witty and just oh, I loved the writing in here. I loved our characters. This has a really cool magic system. It's set in Victorian London, but they're wizards and witches and magic and things like that and just I loved the magical elements so much. This has a really good mystery plot in it as well. The mystery in here isn't anything like mind-blowing. You don't get to the end and there's no like wild crazy reveal. Like you kind of see it coming, but like the execution of the mystery was just so well done. It's very similar to like if you like the Veronica Speedwell series, the mysteries in here feels very similar to where it's like you're not necessarily surprised by the reveal, but like the journey to get there is so well crafted. This has a great like grumpy sunshine opposites attract sort of romance. One of them is very like outgoing and charismatic and the other one is very like cold and shut off and they have a wonderful romance and I do believe that this is going to be a series. Nothing has been announced yet for the sequel. It's already one of my most anticipated books for whenever it comes out because I need more. So I have 3 honorable mentions. All of these were 4.5 stars. Like they are books that I really, really loved. They didn't quite hit that 5-star rating. And so the first one is Summer Sons by Lee Mandello. I've talked about this book ad nauseum, I feel like, on my channel. I have not stopped raving about it. It is very nearly a 5-star book, but there was just like a little something that kept it from being an absolute 5-star book. This is one of the most like beautiful, haunting books I've ever read, and I cannot wait to read more from this author. Again, I'm not going to go into the synopsis and stuff of this because I've talked about this in like 9,000 videos. I highly recommend this if you love Southern Gothic stories with queer coming of age sort of subplots. It is one of my favorite books of the fall season. Another honorable mention is King of Battle and Blood by Scarlett St. Clair. This is the epitome of entertainment, but not necessarily a literary masterpiece. This book is so addicting and so much fun. This is not the most like elegantly written book. This isn't going to win any sort of literary award, but if you just want a like fast-paced, highly entertaining fantasy romance, definitely give this one a read. This is by the same author as A Touch of Darkness, which I have not read yet, but I assume is kind of like in the same vein. This is a very familiar setup. You are following a princess who marries like the supposed bad guy, but along the way discovers that they are not that evil and that the whole like world that they thought was like good and everything like that is actually more corrupt than what they thought and has been hiding secrets. And this has vampires and witches and all kinds of fantastical beings and it's just a really, really good time. This book is not that short, but I read it in 2 days because once you like get going in this book, it's one of those books that just flies by. Like you cannot put it down. And this was, like I said, a 4.5 star. It didn't quite hit the 5-star because there are definitely elements of here where I was like, okay, it was a little corny. But like the entertainment factor is just so dang high, and I cannot wait to continue on with this series. And then my last honorable mention is Unhinged by Onley James. I was really leery going into this because the series has been so hyped this year, but y'all, it is worth the hype. I am actually planning on reading the sequel this week because I've actually read quite a few disappointing books like back to back. I think I've DNF'd like 4 books this month. I need a guaranteed good book, and I this series the series is gonna deliver, I think. So I loved these characters. It's a little insta-lovey, it's a little over the top, but again, the entertainment factor in here and like the romance elements and everything are just top tier. Loved this book. If you like dark romance, if you like romance, definitely give this one a read. It is worth all the hype that it's gotten this year, and I cannot wait to continue on with the series. So getting into my 4 5-star books from this season, first up was Mating the Huntress by Talia Hibbert. I read this for, I think, the Paranormal Romance Readathon. I will link that vlog up in the cards, but this is a shifter romance novella, and this was so cute. This is probably the softest and like funniest shifter romance I've ever read. Usually they're like really dark and serious, but this one just didn't take itself too seriously. This hero is such a cinnamon roll, and I loved him so much. And the romance in here was really cute. And I do believe that this is going to be a series. Nothing has been like announced yet. Talia Hibbert hasn't like revealed anything like how many books or who it's going to follow or anything like that, but really hope that there is because this is just such a fun take on this type of world. I will link that video up above if you want even more like live thoughts while I was reading this. And then quickly mentioning again A Marvelous Light by Freya Marske. This was another 5-star book. It was a favorite. I absolutely loved this one. Just read this one. It was fantastic. And then the last 2 5-star books that I read this month were actually Christmas romances, which was so surprising. I feel like for holiday romances, I never really expect to give them 5 stars. Usually they're like 3 and 4-star reads for me. Like they're fun, they're cute, but I never expect them to be favorites. But I read 2. And first up was Window Shopping by Tessa Bailey. This was a Ted Lasso inspired novella, and this was so stinking cute. I didn't really know what to expect going into this one. I had just been seeing it like all over on Instagram, and I knew that it was like inspired by Ted Lasso, or like the hero was inspired by Ted Lasso. But this was so good. You are following a heroine who just got out of a correctional facility after being there for 4 years, and she's kind of looking for a fresh start. She ends up getting hired as a window dresser at this like really high-end like Macy's type store, but she has this immediate connection to the general manager of the store, and the 2 of them have this absolutely adorable opposites attract romance because she is this really cold, like closed off person, and he is this like unbelievably warm and loving and accepting guy, and he just wants to like help her and take care of her, but she is determined to like take care of herself. I love how Tessa Bailey addressed like the power dynamic between them because he is her boss, so there is like this like automatic like power imbalance between them, but it is addressed like right away from the get-go, and I loved that discussion. And they had such good chemistry, and even though their attraction is definitely instantaneous, I still really liked how their romance developed, and there was never a case of like miscommunication in here either. Like there were times that the heroine would kind of like jump to a conclusion, or the hero would jump to a conclusion, and they would immediately check themselves and like be like, "Nah, I made that up." And they would like walk themselves back, and I really, really appreciated that. This book is super sexy. Tessa Bailey is a queen of dirty talk, and that was definitely the case in here. And I loved the juxtaposition of that with the hero, of him being this like really, really warm and sweet guy, like to everybody else, but like could turn it on with her, and it was just I loved this. The final book on this list was another Christmas novella, and that was The Mistletoe Motive by Chloe Leese. This book was so fantastic, and it has me even more excited to get to the Bergman Brothers series in the new year because I loved everything about this. So you're following these two characters who both work at this bookstore, and they are just very different people, and because of that, they butt heads and they don't really get along very well. And at the start of this book, they learn that that bookstore is struggling and they might need to cut back in the new year. And that kind of starts this like battle between them to see who can sell more books. And then whoever sells more books is guaranteed to keep their job. While they are doing this, they slowly get to know each other and they start to learn things about each other. And as they are learning these things about each other, they realize that some of the things that they thought they knew weren't necessarily true. And so like as they get to like know more about each other, they realize that they were like making jumping to conclusions about each other, making judgments about each other that weren't valid, and slowly their relationship changes. And one of my favorite things about this book was how the romance progressed because Chloe Lease was able to like take a relationship that had like a year's worth of history and slowly build it up so that like I believed in the history as well as their progression from enemies to lovers all in like a 200-page book. Like it was so fantastically paced, and I have no idea how she accomplished it, but I fell in love with this romance so much. The chronic illness rep in here was amazing, as well as the neurodiverse rep in here. I loved absolutely everything about it. I loved the writing, and I just like I said, it has me even more excited to pick up her backlist in the new year, which I do plan to do, and vlog. So I'm really excited for more of her books. So that is it for my fall wrap up and my fall favorites. Let me know if you have read any of these and what your thoughts were. Let me know what your favorite books of fall were, and I will catch y'all in my next video. Bye.
Hold you close, forget about everyone else. Isn't this how it's supposed to be? Making our Christmas memories.